take. Guitar, take me, take. Laxar, take. Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen and children. And welcome to the home of the very famous Ribchester helmet. Today we'll be doing various demonstrations for you, including cavalry and a little later today some gladiatorial. So before we get to the rest of it, we'd like to give you a small insight into what life might have been like in the Roman army almost 2,000 years ago. Now, the Romans invaded Britain properly in AD 43. We're told 4 legions invaded, the 14th, the 20th, the 9th and the 2nd. A Roman legion at this time consisted of approximately 5,500 heavily armoured infantrymen. In support of them were about half that number of auxiliaries. The difference between the legionary and the auxiliary, well, the main difference was that the legionary was a Roman citizen and the auxiliary was not. The auxiliary's reward for 25 years service in the army was a grant of Roman citizenship. So the soldiers themselves, on applying to join the army with letters of reference, underwent 4 months basic training. During those 4 months, they were either accepted or rejected. If they were accepted, they began 25 years service, the same as the auxiliary. During that time, the ordinary legionary was not permitted to marry. It was only the officers who were allowed to have wives and children with them. But during that time, this man was a full-time soldier. He was paid. But from his pay was deducted the cost of his equipment. So every Roman soldier ended up owning all of his own armour. At the end of his 25 years service, he sold that equipment back to the army, who then sold it on to another new recruit. So the myth that all Roman soldiers were dressed exactly the same is just that, it's a myth. From a distance, they may well have looked identical, but when you got closer, you would find a complete mix of equipment. So let's have a look in more detail at some of that equipment. The Optio will place the men closer to you, and I'll describe what the men are wearing.
I know which is somewhere to buy your own.
Depends how much you pay you put into it.
If we start at the top, for those men wearing them, the crest, Christa in Latin. Little is known of its true function. Yes, it did exist. The helmets that are discovered still have a fitting on them that held a stand, that held a crest. Whether these were actually worn in battle is debatable. They are very flimsily attached to the helmet. They're tied at the front and back and are easily removed. They may well have been only for parades or special occasions. Even the colour is debatable. The only crest to date discovered is at Wenderlander on Hadrian's Wall, and it still does have red pigment attached to it. The helmet that it sat on was bronze or iron. They varied in style depending on which Roman factory they were made in. The eyebrows that we find on many Roman helmets, not all of them, but many of them, aren't there to make it look pretty. They're there to strengthen the metal at the front of the helmet where it's likely to get hit. The brow band to stop a long sword sliding down the helmet and hitting the man's nose and eyes underneath. The cheek plates protect the sides of your face, and we do know that the Romans had a thing about people's ears. Many Romans believed that when you were born, your soul entered through your ear. When you died, it left through the other ear. So we generally find very good ear guards on Roman helmets so that you don't lose a piece or all of one of those precious ears. The neck guard protects the neck. Around the neck, a scarf for Kale, not to keep you warm, but to protect your neck from your own armour. It has a tendency to chafe. Underneath that, the famous Roman tunica. Now there is and will continue to be great debate over the colour of Roman tunics. We do have evidence for colour. We also have evidence for undyed material, as you mostly see today. Now, some of the ladies here today have already asked our Roman soldiers what they wear under their tunicas. Where are you, ladies? Well, we're not shy and we'll show you. Caligai, military sandals. That's what we wear underneath our tunicas. Made for cross-country marching because most of the terrain is similar to what we're stood on today and even rougher. There weren't the wonderful roads until they actually built them. Back up to the top, the body armour, once again a mixture of equipment. Lorica segmentata for the most part, strips of metal held together with leather and rivets. It would not be uncommon to see chain shirts and scale shirts in equal numbers amongst the men. They were not reserved for one particular section of the army, as many believe. Around the waist a belt, cingulum militare. The cingulum, we believe, is the apron at the front. Metal studs with apron ends, all very decorative. Were they decoration or did they have a function? Again, something that is greatly debated. On the belt, many soldiers carried a pugio, a dagger. If your sword was broken or knocked from your hand, you had another weapon to fight with until you got yourself sorted out properly. But the most famous weapon of all was the Roman short sword, the gladius. Now, primarily, this was a stabbing weapon, not a slashing weapon. Rome's enemies used longer swords than Roman soldiers, and they were slashing weapons, which is what most of the armour is designed to protect the man against. Now, it doesn't matter how much armour you're wearing, how brave you are, if you're stood in a line with lots of other Roman soldiers and you've got hundreds if not thousands of people charging towards you, no one can stand up against that sort of assault. So the Romans threw javelins, the pilum. The idea of the javelin was to kill or injure as many people as possible before they ever got to you. But the javelin has a problem. If you throw it at someone and you miss, they're very likely to pick it up and throw it back at you. So it was designed to bend or break on impact, making it pretty useless for anyone else to use. We're told Roman soldiers carried 2 of these each into battle and could probably throw both of them before they ever had to draw a sword and start fighting anyone. But going back a little bit, the shield, the scooter, made of strips of wood glued together, covered in leather, covered in cloth. A boss of iron or bronze on the front to protect your hand and to be used as an offensive weapon. Now, I said they were glued together. Well, the Romans had fantastic glue, except for one thing. It wasn't waterproof. And if the shields became very wet for any length of time, days of rain, crossing rivers, and they simply couldn't dry out, the glue came unstuck. So, you'd never see Roman soldiers marching as you see today, other than in a battle. Their shields were kept in waterproof leather bags until they were needed. And before a battle, hopefully there was time to take the cover off and then use the shield as it was designed and as you see. So these are typical legionaries of the mid-1st, early 2nd century. I spoke earlier about the auxiliaries. Here we have an example of one of those auxiliaries. You can instantly see the difference. He's carrying a different style of shield, an oval shield. This man was recruited from the provinces. This man will get Roman citizenship after 25 years. He is Romanised in as much as he has adopted the gladius, the Roman short sword, rather than his ethnic long slashing sword. He has a typical Roman belt and he wears a chain shirt, a plainer helmet, a spear instead of a javelin. This man fought very much with the spear in his hand, and these units were the first into battle. At Mons Graupius, under the great General Agricola, when he went to conquer Scotland, fought the Caledonians and sent his auxiliary units in first, as every general did, and they completely won the day. The legionaries merely had to stand and watch. So a vital part of the Roman army. It was auxiliary units that also made up the Roman navy.